want a job but don't currently have one because they've given up looking, that percentage would effectively double to at least 8%. And piggybacking off of last month's debate on artificial intelligence, we learned that close to 40% of all jobs in the United States could be replaced by robots by the year 2030. We're talking blue and white collar jobs. And with this increasing threat to the American dream, a lot of important people and places are starting to grow curious about implementing a universal basic income. So imagine with me if you can, if all of us in this room and all the people in your life received $1,000 from the government every month. Cold hard cash, no questions asked. Doesn't matter if you're employed or unemployed, rich or poor, young or old, this $1,000 monthly paycheck would be a human right. What do you think would happen? Do you think we'd work harder to achieve our dream life or grow lazy in this comfortable safety net? And more importantly, on top of the 126 welfare and anti-poverty programs that exist currently, how the hell do we pay for this? Well, that sounds controversial enough to spark a debate, so let's have it. We have 4 qualified debaters this evening arguing for and against the motion, universal basic income is the most important solution to rising joblessness in America. Again, my name is Evan Rhoda, and I will be this evening's moderator. Coming up first, debating for the motion, you'll recognize our next debater from last month's debate on artificial intelligence. He is a senior business analyst at Tiffany & Company and a former anchor for Complex Hustle, a media channel dedicated to today's do-it-yourself generation about business, technology, and entrepreneurship. He produces videos designed to get people registered to vote and spent years as a technology blogger for the Huffington Post. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Hanley. Our next debater you'll also recognize from a previous debate in September we had on the cost of higher education. He holds a BA in economics with honors from NYU and a JD on a full academic scholarship from the University of San Diego. He is a former member of the NYU parliamentary debate team and now a financial planner, writer, and educator. Please welcome Eric Carter. Next, voting for the motion, he is a writer, filmmaker, actor, and former engineer. For the past year, he's been researching universal basic income for a new documentary film project called Bootstraps, which we're actually going to get an exclusive look at after the debate. Very happy to have him here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Conrad Shaw. And last but not least, he is an attorney for the Bronx Defenders, which promotes justice to low-income communities. He received his JD from New York University School of Law and has worked to appeal criminal convictions with New York's Office of the Appellate Defender and helped litigate police brutality cases with the New York Civil Liberties Union. I wish he was here for the stop and frisk debate. He coached his fellow students in oral advocacy as the competition's chair of the NYU Moot Court Board and has taught persuasion and debate as a guest lecturer at St. John's University, the King's College, and NYU. We're very excited to have him here with us. Please welcome Sam Nally. So ladies and gentlemen, the way this is going to run down is each debater is going to have 5 minutes to give an opening speech. We will then open it up to questions the debaters can ask each other. I will ask them a few questions and we'll open it up to the audience for 30 minutes. And then we'll have a 3-minute closing speech per debater and then we'll tally up the votes and find out who won. So coming up first, voting for the motion is Brian Hanley.
Thanks, Evan. Hi, everyone. So I want to start with a question tonight. How many of you had lunch today? Raise your hands, please. And how about breakfast? Did anyone have breakfast? Keep your hands up if you did. So I want to start by saying that if you had your hands raised for either of those questions, you were one of the fortunate ones, because unfortunately, today on November 30th in 2017, 1 billion people across the globe could not afford any meal today, and they're still going to go to bed hungry tonight, okay? So this is a tragedy that happens every single day, and it's something that most of us do virtually nothing to prevent. Pew Research recently found that 71% of humans across the planet are poor or low income, which means they're trying to survive every day on less than $10, right? Which is pretty hard to do. So you may say, well, at least we're not a part of the rest of the world. Good thing we're actually the richest country in the history of the world, okay? But as it turns out, unfortunately, things aren't much better in America. In fact, in America, the richest 1/10 of 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90% of Americans combined, which is something you've probably heard before, and you may have become numb to. Another one is that the top 1% in America actually takes in 52% of all income in America. But my favorite statistic, actually my least favorite, is that now in 2017, the richest 8 people in the world, who all happen to be men, own more wealth than half of the world's population put together, 3.5 billion people. So it used to be the richest 43% owned as much as half, now it's the richest 8. So you could fit 8 of them in an Uber, drive them around New York City, and in that Suburban you would have more wealth, income, and power, frankly, than half of humankind. So we have an inequality problem. I don't think anyone here is going to debate that. But what I'm here to tell you is, unfortunately, that problem is going to get worse and worse and worse. And the reason, it's not this sci-fi dystopia of robots taking our jobs. It's a reality of computer systems, artificial intelligence, replacing what we do. So Oxford University recently found that 50% of all American jobs are going to be automated in the next 2 decades. PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I started my career, they came out with a similar study that found that 38%, a little more conservative, 38% of American jobs still are going to be gone in the next 15 years. And so because we're in New York City, I'm going to assume that most of you aren't truck drivers or manufacturers, so you may say, well, thank God my job is safe. And you may be right, for now, because we may see that the truck drivers are the first ones to lose the jobs. In fact, truck driving is the most common job in 29 states in the US, and we're predicted to lose somewhere between 70 and 80 million truck driving jobs across the globe in just the next decade. So what we're talking about today is we're on the precipice of, frankly, an unprecedented economic crisis, an unemployment crisis the likes of which we've never seen before. And the reason things are going to get worse and worse and worse is because now we're talking about artificial intelligence. Now, what is AI? Because we've seen something called, weak artificial intelligence in the past, which is like the robot that plays chess better than the best chess-playing human, or the Go-playing robot that finally defeated the best Go-playing human. So we're already seeing that robots are starting to beat us in individual tasks. But the scary, terrifying direction we're moving is actually artificial general intelligence, which is a computer system that doesn't just do one task, like chess better than us, it actually does every single task better than us. Anything a human can do, it can be programmed into a computer system. And I'm just going to give you a brief technical explanation of why. So human brains have a size limitation. You have to fit the human brain in a human cranium. Computer systems can be any size. You can build a computer the size of this office or the size of Manhattan. Likewise, human brains have a speed limitation. Biochemical circuits process information relatively slow, millions of times slower than electronic circuits. So not only can computer systems literally be millions of times larger than our brains, but they can actually be millions of times faster. So just get out of your minds right now, if there's something that you do in your job that you think is only something a human can do because it involves relationships or soft skills, it's something you could put into code. So the robots are coming for all of our jobs. Now, I'm going to make this pretty simple, and Conrad's going to expand it and make it a little more complex. When we don't have jobs anymore, which we intend to argue, and I hope you will understand, is an inevitability. When we don't have jobs, we don't have income. And so the easiest, most important way to remedy that is to actually introduce a universal basic income, which is a periodic payment which is distributed unconditionally to all individuals. And what that means is there are no strings attached. So you do whatever you want with that money. So if you don't have an income otherwise and you want to use that money to cover your basic needs, like your food, your shelter, your education, that's exactly what a UBI is for. Or if you're like us, you have a job, you have another way of bringing in income, this allows you to pursue your passions, so you're not beholden to the man and the system, and you can finally actually start to live out some of your dreams. So this is something that may be perceived as radical in this current system that we live in, but what we're here to tell you today is that what's truly radical is the idea that 8 human beings own more than 3.5 billion. This is actually a much more sensible, common sense, empathetic approach to dealing with this problem.
Brian, I'll cut you off.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, so I actually don't disagree with anything that Brian just said. The question that's before us today is this resolution that asks, is universal basic income the most important solution to the problems that Brian talked about? And we'll talk about 3 reasons why I would say that is not the case. Okay. First of all, let's take a look at this problem of joblessness right now as it's occurring. This currently is not a problem of automation. If this was a problem of automation, we'd see labor productivity going up. Instead, we see labor productivity coming down. So when you ask small businesses that do most of the new hiring. Why aren't you hiring workers? 45% of these small businesses, according to the National Federation of Independent Businesses, have said the biggest problem they have is they cannot find workers with the skills needed. So in other words, there's currently a huge demand for workers that's not being met. So one thing we could do, instead of spending trillions of dollars sending checks to people, many of whom don't quite frankly need the money, the first best return on investment is to actually train a lot of these unemployed people to get a job to which, number one, can help them contribute to society and help the economy grow. And now, instead of receiving tax dollars, they're paying into it at a tiny fraction of the cost of UBI. But it's not just the private sector that needs more workers. I would say the public sector needs more workers too. Number one, we have a crumbling infrastructure. We need more workers to help rebuild the country in terms of roads and bridges and high-speed rail and things like that. We frankly need more teachers. We need to have smaller class size. This has been shown to be one of the biggest factors in student success. We're going to need more caregivers, more nurses, people to help with elderly care, community health care clinics. All of this is going to cost money that could be used instead of, again, paying people that frankly often don't need the money. We can create a lot more jobs this way and also help tighten the job market in the private sector. Now, of course, there's going to be people that are going to fall through the cracks. Now, the Center for American Progress has estimated it would only cost about $158 billion to give a job to every single unemployed person well above the poverty line. So again, for a fraction of the cost of UBI, we can eliminate joblessness today. Now, let me address the longer-term issue of automation. What if the robots take all our jobs? Which, by the way, is not guaranteed. This is a whole separate debate. But let's concede for a moment that this will happen. What is the best way to address that issue? One way we could do it is to tax the people that own the robots, many of whom, by the way, can avoid that by simply going overseas, right? You can avoid this tax very easily by escaping the very large tax that this would create. But there's a second possible solution. Instead of taxing the robots, and by the way, the second solution is a much better way to deal with inequality. What if we allow more people to own the robots? What if we create a sovereign wealth fund? Start investing money to buy the stocks in all the companies in the United States. This would be buying an index within the United States. Have that money grow. And so eventually, instead of getting just $1,000 a month, we could essentially make everyone a millionaire in this country. This allows people, number one, to retire early. And number two, when the robots, if and when the robots do replace us, you are an owner. Talk about, now, would you rather be an owner of these robots that are going to be running the economy? Or would you want to be dependent on the government to tax robots, which may be able to avoid the tax, and then basically get a small trickle of whatever they give you, while Brian eloquently talked about the top 1% are still going to own all the robots. So we can do exactly what they want to do, implement UBI. Even if it did work, where we're able to tax people, we're giving people breadcrumbs instead of actually allowing them to participate in this, this new economy that the robots will create. So, to summarize my points, the basic problem with UBI is it's an overly simplistic solution to a complex problem. It's an overly simple solution to a complex problem that doesn't go far enough. So my criticism is not that UBI is too radical. My criticism is it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't do as much to help people. Someone unemployed getting $1,000 a month, they would much rather have a job paying a lot more than that. Those of us who have jobs now, rather than getting even an extra $1,000 a month, in the long term, we'd be better by actually being able to be an owner of this new economy, rather than someone dependent on the government for that income. So again, the problem with UBI is not that it's too radical, it does not go far enough.
Okay, you said a lot of details there that I would like to go through during the Crossfire, because it's really a one-at-a-time sort of thing to get in people's brains. So I'll stay more theoretical here. If this is your first time learning about universal basic income, it's an old idea, but it has exploded back into the public consciousness over the last few years. You can tell by articles coming out in ever larger media outlets, by the increasing coverage in the news, by the Silicon Valley billionaires jumping in line to promote it, by people devoting their lives to advocating for it, and by the steadily growing number of politicians dipping their toes into the water and expressing a modicum of support, sympathy, or curiosity for it. But the politicians always come last. You can tell because we're here debating it today, and it's far from the first debate that has happened. So I come from an engineering background, and as such, I love to get deep into the semantics of why UBI is so much more elegant and effective to implement than any other economic or social policy out there. And there are very many reasons to support it as vastly superior to our current welfare system. And I expect we'll get into many of them today. Yes, it will reduce crime. Yes, it will begin to combat wealth and income inequality in a meaningful way. Yes, it will act as a cushion against the major disruptions we face in the job market due to automation and globalization. Yes, it will cut bureaucracy. Yes, it will erase the stigma that comes with targeted programs. And yes, it is easily affordable, and it could be argued would pay for much of itself, and I'll get to that later. But largely, these reasons are technical in nature, and they are driving the explosion of interest in UBI, as Silicon Valley repeatedly warns us that robots are coming for our jobs. And they are, I believe it. I mean, I've looked into it a lot. And these are all valid reasons to support a UBI, but they are not the most crucial thing to understand. And I'll get to what is in a minute. What we're seeing now is a flood of counterproposals and supposed compromises like a job guarantee, an expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, or the EITC. It calls for a sort of targeted UBI that only goes to those who really need it. And many proponents of these ideas claim they would be UBI friendly and achieve a lot of the same goals, but be less radical, and therefore more politically saleable. And while well-intentioned and potentially beneficial and worthwhile to pursue in their own ways, these proposals completely misunderstand the premise and the value of UBI and the transformational shift that it represents. They're missing the letter U. It's plain and simple. U, remember, stands for universal or unconditional, as in no matter who you are, whether or where you find or choose employment, where you came from, what you believe, or any other circumstances, you deserve, as a human right, the guarantee of food, of shelter, of survival. A job guarantee is an oxymoron. It is simply impossible to ensure every single person a job. He said himself, well, some people will fall through the cracks. But that's not just an idea. Those are real people. And it's a lot of people, and it's growing. So who gets left out, or stuck in a long line, or forced to try and prove that what they find valuable counts as a job worth paying for? And if someone simply chooses not to work, do we truly believe they deserve to starve to death? And always be wary of things like the EITC and the language they use, targeting working families. What does that mean for people who are single or who are unemployed? Anything that targets in any way, no matter how well-intentioned, is necessarily going to create groups of people who will not qualify. And if there's even one single person who does not qualify, then we are not treating it as a human right, as we should be. But before we dive deeper, I want to point out that the motion at hand here today is UBI is the most important solution to rising joblessness in America. And there's something subtle in there that's really easy to miss. You might read it as UBI is the most important solution to the problem of rising joblessness in America. But it's a lot more profound than that. UBI does a great leap further than simply trying to fight the job loss that is inevitable. It directly combats the idea that joblessness should necessarily even be a problem in the first place, at least not a catastrophic one. Being unemployed, for whatever reason, need not be the life-wrecking thing that we currently understand it to be. And only UBI is powerful enough to get us to that place. Thank you.
This debate asks you to picture the future and the seismic changes that are coming to define our reality. One of those is automation, but that is only one of the issues, one of the existential threats on the horizon caused by the system of capitalism, caused by the system of production that we currently live in. We must also consider that even though automation may bring us increased prosperity and abundance, we also face scarcity. We face scarcity from ecological disasters and ecological changes that are being wrought by capitalism. We face dangers of rising inequality. We face dangers of militarism. And their proposal not only does it address these existential threats, it indeed exacerbates them. The most important solution to joblessness in America is not a handout. It is not a pittance. It is a seizure of the means of production. It is an end to the system of capitalism. Because UBI is not rooted in upending the system that has brought us here, the system that allows people to starve to death. UBI is rooted in an idea by Milton Friedman that by paying people off, by spreading around capital a little bit, they can stave off the coming forces of change. And we say that ultimately, that shift is going to happen. So the meaningful question is, what puts us in a position to access that better future? What puts us in a better position to create a better world and not merely extend the lifespan of the system that we have now? So I want to sketch out some of those futures that we face for you and sketch out how UBI will put us in a weakened position to take control over the means of production, to not just be consumers, but be producers of our future. The first of these problems is from rentiers, right? Those who charge rent. You can imagine a system even where we have universal basic income, and indeed even where we have full automation, in which I can, a la Star Trek, go to my replicator and make a thing, or perhaps it's your 3D printer, right? But if the intellectual property for that thing that I would like to make, whatever it is always owned by someone else, they charge and dictate the price that I will have to pay. So my UBI merely goes back into the pockets of the billionaires that it was allegedly coming from. We also have problems like housing, right? Where if the demand for housing remains inelastic in terms of how much we all need it, right? But the ability that we can pay increases, then just because I'm handed $1,000 extra a month doesn't mean that I get to keep that if all of the landlords then increase the price of rent to $1,000. Again, this is merely cycling the money back to the billionaire class. We have the problems of consumerism, that we are creating more and more addictive products in the forms of pharmaceuticals, in the forms of games, in increasing drives to consume. That again means that just because I have a little extra money in my pocket doesn't mean I'm able to withstand the barrage of advertising, able to withstand the control of my desires that is forced on me from without. And so again, the money goes in the pocket and it comes right back out. We have the problem of capital flight that my friend alluded to, that billionaires who, reasonably seeing that their money was being taken to fund people who they could not exploit as labor any longer, or had no need to exploit for labor any longer, could well depart. But I would suggest that there is another strategy that they would take. With the rise of the alt-right, we have seen a return of the philosophy of exterminism. That there are people who, when capital cannot exploit or doesn't need to exploit the labor force of a group of people, that is a surplus population. We already see this in much of America, in which the poorest people, mostly people of color, the state and the capitalist class would much prefer to incarcerate and exterminate those people rather than give them the things that they would need to actually survive. Ultimately, if you create a world in which capital can continue to accumulate, in which we have a billionaire class that has more and more control over the means of production, you leave us in a worse position to fight when that time comes. So we say that rather than wait until we are dependent on their handouts, do it now. Seize the means of production and change the world to create something that we don't have existential threats that will continue to arise from the problems of inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, a lot of information there. We're going to move into the Crossfire now, where I will ask the debaters questions, they will ask each other questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So, Also, just a quick note, you guys all have feedback forms, so if you want to maybe leave a sentence or two for each debater on how they can improve their performance, this is an educational program, so we encourage you guys to give feedback and let them know how they can do better or how great they were. I want to immediately go to you guys off of Sam's point where UBI is just going back to these billionaires. Many argue that universal basic income undermines current welfare and anti-poverty programs. And I think of the earned income tax credit, which gives money to low-income working individuals and couples, especially those with children. Social Security benefits seniors. So if UBI gives the same amount to everyone ages 18 to 64, doesn't that benefit our healthiest employed individuals most, especially those without dependents? Because I think that a family of 4 living in NYC needs a lot more than $1,000 per month to cover their basic living expenses. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, this comes up a lot. The whole, why would we give Bill Gates $12,000, right? And that's because it comes from a misunderstanding of how you would pay for UBI, right? The money doesn't come from nowhere. The money, like every other progressive policy that anyone's proposing, comes from taxing the wealthy, primarily more. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do it through a land value tax. You can do it through carbon taxing. You can do it through just a flat tax on top of the entire progressive system, right? That would, if everyone has a cushion, would basically amount to anyone below a cutoff point making money off the UBI and anyone above too much income being a net contributor to some extent. So if you think, as an example, say you're paying for UBI with a 10% flat tax, which is a very simple and crude way to do it that wouldn't be my first choice, but as an example. If everyone's paying 10% on top of their current progressive taxes, then there's a break-even point at $120,000, where if you're making less than $120,000, you're getting some money from the UBI. At $120,000, you're paying 12 to get your 12, because you get your 12 in UBI, you pay 10% on your 120, and you break even. And then the people with incomes higher are paying in. So what that means is, yeah, it's the first income you make. The $12,000 is the first income everybody makes, because everyone can lose everything and lose their security. So it's a cushion for everyone. But Bill Gates then goes on to make $100 million that year and pays an extra 10% on that. We got $988 million or $1,000 from him. You know what I'm saying? He paid into the system. So complaining that it's not going to be targeted enough is misunderstanding how elegant it actually is. It's saying you can tax it out of the back end rather than trying to have people prove in real time what they're actually making. If you've ever been on unemployment, or if you've ever been on any sort of benefit system, it is a bitch. It sucks, and it's humiliating. And you can take all of that away and take all of that hassle and bureaucracy and government expense out of there if you just give it to people on the front end and tax it out of income on the back end.
Did you guys want to rebut?
I mean, the reality is, you paint a nice picture using a 10% number, but you and I both know the rate's going to be a lot higher than 10% to generate the revenues that you need, which means that the numbers are going to have to come down in terms of that break-even point. I mean, just think about the math. Just paying $12,000 a year to every single person.
So I sat actually after, if you saw the Intelligence Squared debate, where we had this similar thing with Jason Furman and Jared Bernstein, the top economists. I was there and I asked them a question, and they, along the lines of actually getting into the numbers, because all they had to do was trot their credentials out.
That was you.
That was me. I was the angry guy.
I realized that.
And they didn't answer it. But my partner and I, we tracked down Jason Furman and interviewed him in his office in D.C. First thing he said was he was for cash transfers, and then we took him down item by item, and I said, how much could we get out of this? How much could we get out of that? And we came up with $2.5 trillion. And the actual cost of UBI is about $900 billion on the proposal that I was going by, to give every adult $12,000, every kid $4,000. And he instead had to resort to, I think it's better though that we put it into things like the EITC or whatever. It just like wasn't quite clicking, because I think it's his legacy, But people fall through the cracks on that. And it ends up being targeted with a UBI system, just the way you want, because it's a sliding scale.
I've heard a lot of different figures on what UBI would cost for all Americans, everywhere from $990 billion to $1.8 trillion to $2.7 trillion. So
there's one quick fallacy with the $3 trillion number, because if you think about it, 300 million people, times 10,000 a year about, right, is $3 trillion. But what they're not understanding is that you don't just take the entire amount. So as a quick example, if we have a UBI between the four of us, right, and it's $4 per person, and say, so we each start with $4, you would think, so the cost of that is $16, right? But it's not the case. If you have zero income, you keep your whole UBI, so that's 4. If you have a crappy job, you keep 3 of it and pay 1 back in taxes, right? If you have a good job, like a break-even job, you got your 4, you gave back your 4. And I'm the rich guy in this scenario. So I paid 11 in taxes. So I got my 4, and then I gave back my 4, and I paid your 3 and I paid your 4. So what does that mean? If I give you $1 and you give it back 1,000,000 times, it doesn't cost us anything except the time to exchange it, which is all in code, right? So it's not a $16 cost. The real cost is the $7 you guys got. So it's not $3 trillion. It's somewhere between $500 billion and $900 trillion, which is easily justifiable.
Great. All right, I want to give these guys a chance to talk. Let's go to another question. I feel like you guys have a bit of a burden in this question where you're arguing that UBI is not the most important solution. So what do you propose for individuals who have done everything and simply just can't get a job or given up looking? And if the current welfare system is not helping these individuals get a job or escape poverty, what is the best solution to rising joblessness?
Can I answer that first? So, I mean, this is where I talked about, the solution to rising joblessness, the immediate solution is to help people get a job, which would pay a lot more than $1,000 a month. We can do that by job training to help people get the jobs that are available, and we can do that by providing jobs to people who... Now, my point about people falling through the cracks, that was me saying there are going to be people who won't get a job through the expanded government programs I was talking about, and so then what you could do is create a job guarantee as a safety net for those people who don't get the training or who don't, who aren't employed, by the infrastructure programs and healthcare and things like that. So no one is going to fall through the cracks with a job guarantee, and people will actually end up with a lot more money than $12,000 a year. And then the long-term solution, I think, is to help people become owners. Now, Sam and I are a little different on this. I mean, Sam's a socialist. I consider myself a capitalist, but I consider myself a democratic capitalist. I want everyone to be a capitalist. I want everyone to be an owner of these robots. That's the long-term solution, is to help people become an owner of the robots.
Yeah, I would agree that job guarantees are the first thing that we should be talking about. Because let's be real, you can't live on $12,000 a year. You will always have to find work. And if they're saying simply that you either live on that or you find one of the last human remaining jobs, I think that even if you could live on it, it's not a very good life to not be able to contribute to your society in any meaningful way. I think job guarantees are the best thing because there's plenty of jobs that still need to be done. They're not incentivized by capitalism. They don't make money for anybody. Social workers are a perfect example of this. We have an overwhelming number of people with degrees in psychology and sociology, right, who can't find jobs under the system right now, but who, if there was a guarantee, if there were government jobs available, that they would have a meaningful ability to participate in their community. They would be developing skills. They would be changing the community around them in a way that was useful. And furthermore, and we agree on the importance of democracy in this, right? The problem of only having a system where you get a handout from the government, you buy things from corporations, and you're employed by corporations, is that you don't have any say in what the corporations do, and what your job will be, and whether your work is actually useful for anybody, because there's a lot of people with very useless jobs that we wouldn't want to do if we had any real choice in the matter, right? And so I think ultimately a system of job guarantees, a system of planning that let the community decide what we want to do, rather than relying on supplementing the system of capitalism.
But if I can interject with this jobs guarantee, Eric brought up a point where employers can't find workers with specialized labor. So if you have a point where people can't even afford the degrees to get the specialized labor, how do they get that money?
Again, we're talking about a system in which, the alternative that I'm advocating, in which there is democratic control over the automation, over the means of production, right? Like the factories and the spaces. That's when you get the community being able to generate what its needs would be, and then incentivize people to go ahead and take education.
Yeah,
Wait, I wonder, can I respond to that real quick?
Quick.
All right, real quick. I want to get to what I think Jason Furman's point was. This is, I think Furman's point was, if you're going to spend, let's use your number, $900 billion. There are better ways to use that money. One of which is job guarantees, $158 billion, and job training.
So let me interject, because when it comes down to arithmetic, the U.S. is spending less than 1% of its GDP on job training and retraining program, which relative to the rest of the industrialized world is woefully inadequate on all levels. So the argument that not only are we going to allocate the resources in Washington to train people, not only do I find that unlikely, but that we're going to be able to do it in time to compensate for what's really going to be the worst fall off in employment that we've ever seen. That's a guarantee. And I mean, it sounds like, we're here just to really focus on the motion, because this isn't about commercial viability and us arguing that we're going to be able to easily afford, even though I think Conrad could do that, a universal basic income. That's really not the burden. The burden here is to argue that this is the most important solution to what's going to be really an unseen problem in terms of unemployment. And these guys, it sounds like their alternative is to replace capitalism with socialism or communism. And just so we're clear, what we're here to argue is nothing of that sort. In fact, a misconception of your universal basic income is that it's associated with a socialist system, when in reality it can be perfectly applied to a capitalist system when it's taxed. And so we think that actually capitalism can be saved. And we're not here to say that the whole thing should be scrapped, because capitalism, what is it? It's a set of rules. It's a set of rules around property, contracts, monopolies, enforcement. So these are real rules. These are written by regulatory agencies. These are written by lobbyists in Washington. They're written by congressmen. And so these rules are serving a certain group of people right now. It is the ruling class at this time. These rules could, though, be rewritten, and they could work to actually support the many and work for all of us and not just the few. And so I find it interesting that we're here with really what is a principle, simple plan that, if implemented, would work economically, would work on a moral level to remedy and eradicate inequality. And I just want to hear, what is the actual proposal that you're offering as the alternative most important solution? What is it? It's communism?
Wait, no, that's not good.
Can I take a couple of those things?
Let's move to questions, because I want to give the audience a chance here. Let's just be clear, if I call on you, please, no lengthy diatribes. This is not a soapbox platform. We just want to get questions into these guys. So I saw your name up first back there.
So maybe going to what, Brian, you were about to hit on there at the end. You went over the communist cliff. But there's on the against side, there's a preponderance of sort of ideas that have been, I'm going to go through a comment and then a question, a preponderance of ideas that are being recycled. So there's a lot of training programs. We've been through socialism, we've been through communism. However, on the solution side, how is the defendability of this being a solution in America? Because the system is extremely large. So for instance, to say, I snap my fingers, everybody's getting $12,000 a year in this room. That's tantamount to a $12,000 tax cut to everybody in this room here, because it's going in and out. So how can you implement, I'm not saying, is universal basic income a good idea or a good solution? And is it really implementable?
So the last thing you said, it really paints a picture of this audience, right? Everyone in here is going to get a $12,000 tax cut. But that's not everyone in the country. A lot of the country is making, $10,000, $20,000, nothing. And we've been touring around the country seeing this. And it doesn't exist so much in WeWork in New York City, but it exists around the country, and they voted for Trump because they're hurting. And there's a big misconception with what Sam is saying, in that it seems like he's implying that if you give everyone $12,000, and it's like you're expecting everyone to live on that. I have lived on $12,000 a year in Manhattan for the past 10 years, by the way, so it is doable. Maybe you have to have roommates, but it's not the same as living on the street, and it's not the same as starving. But as to your other solutions, like the job guarantee, I agree, that's a great idea, but not until everyone is guaranteed not to be starving or sleeping on the street. You can do both. And I question your numbers, $158 billion is not enough to give everyone a high-paying job. If you do the math, it's not even close.
Let's move to another question. Does anyone have a question for the against side? Those specifically for the against.
my question is for Sam. You talked about seizing the means of production as a solution. How would you propose that happens?
So I'm going to stand up just so I can see. Yeah, I mean, this is something that can be done in a variety of ways. So, for instance, in some industries, you see nationalization, right? A buyout of the existing the existing capital of a particular system. So, for instance, maybe all of the oil wells, right, are bought out or taken. Doesn't really matter to me from their existing private owners. And then transferred, ideally, to a form of democratic control, where the people who actually work in that factory, who actually work on those wells, and not to mention all the rest of us, would get to decide what's produced and how. And I think in that sort of, and that's exactly what I'm talking about here, right? A form of either nationalization or even smaller types of community control would be what we're advocating for. And again, we're talking about a future in which there is automation, which there is basically no longer a need for labor. And so at the point where the machines can largely do almost all of the work that needs to be done, why shouldn't those machines work for all of us, is I think the question that I keep coming back to. And the answer is, well, it's limited by our ability to manage it, our ability to imagine, and our ability to cooperate with each other.
Just very quick response to what you said, because basically what I wanted to say too is both of what you guys are saying, employee takeover or public takeover of work, as well as ownership of robots, those are excellent cases for UBI. The question is, where does the money go? Does it go to the government to decide where it's spent, or will we put it in the pockets of every single American to know what's best for themselves? It's the same money. The question is, how is it administered? So you make a sovereign wealth fund, like you said, but that sovereign wealth fund, like they do in Alaska with oil profits, goes to the exact people who know what they need.
This woman in the back there, sorry.
Hi, this is for the 4 team. My question is, so the first thing I want to ask is, the two terms that we are talking about, universal and basic, right? So what is actually universal? You're looking only at within the territory, maybe within, everyone in US get $12,000 because the jobs currently are being done in Bangladesh or by the robots. So what is the answer when you look at it in a more global, like a broader scale? What happens to those jobs? What happens to people over there? Because it's essentially the corporations that are making money, and we cannot really impose a tax on US companies to provide UBI in Bangladesh. Okay, and the second part is the word basic. What constitutes basic in an absolute sense? $12,000 to everyone might seem like a lot now, but why isn't healthcare? Why isn't education? Why isn't, precision medicine included within the term basic? So my question is that given these sort of vagueness in the terms and the value judgment involved in defining them, how can we advocate for such a hard policy like this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people kind of doing a false choice argument out there, and they're leaning onto what the common libertarian version is, where you give everyone $12,000 and you've got all government programs. And they're saying, see, they want to just get rid of everything. But that's not what any UBI proponent that I respect puts forward. You don't touch universal health care because that cannot be fairly administered with cash. You need a government entity that has power. So healthcare, disability, things like that need their separate programs. This doesn't touch that. But when it comes to food and shelter and clothing, this is something that can be done much more efficiently with cash, and it's been shown in every test they've done so far. To answer your other question, in terms of, so basic can also be tied to whatever you want to tie it to. $12,000 is a symbolic figure because it's our national poverty line. You can make it 20, you can make it 5, you can tie it to the median income. It's an idea, and you figure that out in the details. In terms of global, that's a really good question, because ideally, you want a basic, if it's a human right, it should be for everyone on the planet. And it might be different in different countries, and it has to start somewhere and spread somewhere. They're testing it in Finland, they're testing it in India, they're testing it in Canada, and who knows where it'll be first. But I think it'll spread. But in poorer countries that aren't wealthy, right now there's a very good argument for basic income as a strong a really powerful method of foreign aid as well, and bringing other developing countries up. Because if you think about it, when you give to another country through a charity, you're finding out that 50% is going to pay the people working at the nonprofit, and then the money that goes to them has to come in the form of John Deere tractors or some other American thing, when what they need is this house needs a goat, this house needs a fishing net, this house needs food. And what they're doing with places like Give Directly and the experiments they're doing is they're finding that net cash transfers are twice as effective, and the people are using it much better for themselves. So say Haiti has another earthquake and they have a UBI system in place. What if we could donate straight to that and know it was going straight to the pockets of the Haitians and not maybe to the Clinton Foundation, mysteriously.
Just a 10-second add on.
10-second.
And then I'll pass it. I think that, the spirit of UBI is truly universal in the sense that it's a global phenomenon. It shouldn't just be a national occurrence, and that's where we need to go in the future. While we're on the topic of discussing a bold thing, we should really think boldly and understand that as a human race, we are all in this together. And this very idea of different countries are just arbitrary boundaries that we came up with thousands of years ago. And it's something that one day we should ideally do away with and think of ourselves as one people, not just different nations, some of which have universal health care, others have none whatsoever. I mean, we should all have a universal health care system. We should all have a universal basic income.
I have a question for each side. One, if you're proposing guaranteed jobs to everyone, there are going to be people who are unable or unwilling to work. And I'm thinking of a housemate I had once, mentally challenged and without a work ethic, who was always wanting to be in a structured job preparing group until she got into it, and then she was always trying to get out of it. And if she was given a job, she would have a tantrum the first day, and that would be the end of it.
Cut you off, but you're asking about disabilities, people with disabilities?
People who can't or won't hold a job.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think it's important for two reasons. One is that I should clarify our position that job guarantees are not the only thing that we're saying. I do think that we should be advocating for robust social services, for universal health care, for people who have disabilities, because frankly, all of us in our life will have a period in which we cannot work. And so we should first and foremost place that at the center. But I think that points to a problem with their position of trying to salvage capitalism via a form of handouts for two reasons. One is that it does tend to eliminate those kinds of social services, because where it places the onus on the individual, it's very easy to say, well, they spent their UBI, what else do they want, right? And so I think the long term they're proposing would result in the kinds of programs that your friend relies upon to really survive. But secondly, I would say that it points to the problem of exterminism, right? If we continue to have a system that only sees people as whether they're useful to millionaires, as whether they generate profit, then the end point for that system is to see those people as dispensable. What we need is a system that takes away that profit motive, that takes away that drive to see people as just instruments of growing capital, and sees them as valuable, sees them as members of our community who we should include and love and support.
Can I add a quick thing to that? I think the key thing here is we don't have an unlimited amount of money, in this country. So again, using your numbers, $900 billion, if we're not giving checks to every single person, this actually allows us to have more money for programs for the disabled, for people who really need that money. For people that if we're focusing that money on people that are unemployed, that lack skills, that have disabilities, it's a lot more cost effective in terms of what we're getting, in social benefit for the money we're spending.
What you're not getting is that the focus is what we've tried and it doesn't work. If you've ever been on unemployment, if you've ever done anything, which a lot of people here I don't think have, but I have, it is not efficient. It costs a lot of money, a lot of people can't make it work. It takes a lot of time, and it's humiliating. And the way I was trying to explain before, that if you have an intelligently designed UBI system, it does get targeted without anyone having to prove to a bureaucrat that they actually deserve it, without anyone having to prove that they're actually looking for work. It's whatever you're doing, you're getting. Now, Sam, I feel like you have a very limited view of the human race when you say we should value everyone, but then you turn around and you say the big problem here is that we're not going to have enough people working these useless, trivial jobs, and we need them to keep working these useless, trivial jobs. Like, I don't know, sitting in front of a hotel staring at the wall. I say, if a robot can do that better, they should, and the jobs that we should be valuing people for are as much of the unpaid, unrewarded work today, like staying home, taking care of your sick kids, taking care of your sick parents, going and pursuing art, starting a business, being an entrepreneur. These are the things we should be rewarding. And I agree with everything you're saying, but I think your jump in logic to connect the opposite of it to UBI is just a real misunderstanding of what UBI is.
All right, let's get a couple more questions.
I had a question for them as well.
No, we need to go choose other people. Let's go here. You three? Okay. Here. Okay.
So basically, I just want to kind of follow your guys' premise to the logical conclusion of automation replaces all jobs. And so we've never lived in a system that no longer necessitates work with subsistence needs all being met by machines, hypothetically. What then do we even need the money for? And because by logic, universal basic income is the most important solution, but then you say that the real thing that we care about is hunger and thirst. So why aren't those the most important things to subsidize? In other words, why don't we just guarantee thirst and hunger and a place to live, as opposed to money that can then just be washed away anyway? If we all have $12,000, we all have $0, right?
No, if you've had $0, you know that that's not the same.
I have had $0, but I'm saying that if you give a big country, every single person gets $1,000, and the value of $1,000 goes down by definition. That's the way economics work.
Not to zero.
But it's not going to be given $1,000.
But here, in answer to your question in general, money is an illusion, and it's the tool we have, right? But it is the tool we have. We can't jump tomorrow to valuing solely resources, and we're not efficiently able to give people food that they need. Money is the most efficient tool right now. In the future, with more automation and better policy 100 years from now, maybe we don't need money, and maybe people can just actively access the resources they need, because the point is, resources are abundant. We have enough for everyone. Right now, a basic income is by far the most efficient way of allowing everyone to get access to those resources until we have a better tool.
All right, we have time for one more question, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go. You had your hand up a lot back there. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to stick to one point.
Let's get you a mic.
Just that the prospect. First of all, I just wanted to mention that I am a social worker, so I kind of have that background, for better or worse. And I know a lot about the current system, and that's how I know that doesn't work either. And also that not everyone that can't work a paid job is not working, because a lot of people are doing unpaid work. My question that I have is, how are you going to, for the against side, how are you going to prevent the job training programs and the job guarantees from disintegrating into the current job training programs that we have through public assistance now? Because people that are in forced work programs and public assistance now, those programs are job training programs, and routinely they funnel the people into the worst jobs, the home health aides, the bathroom cleaners. You're saying that we need teachers and we need doctors and nurses, and that's all very true. But the reality of the situation is that when you're destitute and you're on welfare, and your welfare check is anywhere between 10 and 50% of a poverty line income, and you get into a forced work situation, your job training that is offered to you is not something that is like, uplifting, like being a doctor or a teacher or something. You are funneled into home health care, which pays $7 to $9 an hour. So what are you going to do about not perpetuating that discrimination, oppression, and inequality?
Yeah, I think that exactly highlights the problem of the current system, in which job training simply means getting people in a position where they can be exploited more easily by somebody who has the ability to pay them. And I think that this is why we would need to fundamentally we would need to fundamentally rethink the system of production and not just the system of consumption, not just the system of getting a check. Because so long as you have somebody who has the machines and can make with them whatever they want, can dictate whatever terms you're going to be paid under, you're going to get that kind of exploitation. It's only when the machines are publicly held or held by the community that you then get true freedom. And so I would say in this scenario, rather than a scenario where someone is trained to work in the capitalist system, what we would be advocating for is for them to have a stake in the, if they want to, in managing and making decisions about what is produced by the robots who are doing the work, or if they want to, being trained to do something that they find valuable. Now, I would say that some people will still decide to take care of old people, right? Some people are called to be home health aides, right? But I do think that the most important way to make sure that people are not exploited is to remove the system of wealth inequality that allows someone to tell someone else, I'm going to have you do this because it's going to make me a buck.
But your way of removing inequality is by removing people's ability to make money on their own, to reduce the American dream when it once existed, to reduce upward mobility when it exists. And yes, these things are few and far between right now, and that's one of the problems we're all mutually agreed on. But what we're not agreed on is you guys want to replace capitalism with communism, and well,
wait.
And we want to make sure that capitalism works for more people by creating a universal basic income as a baseline. And something just to make clear, we're not. Yeah, the UBI does not replace your traditional income. So if you guys have a job right now, you still get to work your job. If you want to start a business and be an entrepreneur, you get to have that entrepreneurial spirit. What they're arguing is that you don't, and that you're going to seize the means of production, which in itself is more than a long shot.
All right, we're going to conclude the Crossfire section of this debate. I'm going to let you guys hash it out in your closing remarks, 3 minutes each. We're going to start with the con side first. Eric or Sam, you're right.
Well, I have so much to respond here. I don't even know how to do this. So first of all, I think the most important thing I want to say is we are not the socialist communist side, as I explained. I mean, Sam will say he is. I am not. You do not have to believe in seizing the means of production to agree with us about UBI. But I really want to get to the last thing you said about, we're crushing the American dream. It's the opposite. Okay, the way I look at it is what we're trying to do is promote the American dream. What is the American dream? The American dream is upward mobility, and where does that come from? So part of it is the education and the training that you want to do. That's where we want to spend part of that $900 billion is to give people the skills to move up, right? To give people a job that's going to pay a lot more than $1,000 a month. I mean, we're talking about there's a job guarantee. That's the worst case scenario. But a lot of these jobs are going to pay a lot more than that. We're going to need home health care aid. There's a lot of people that are going to need elder care. Well, let's pay those people more. Okay? If that's the issue is people are feeling exploited. Because we're not giving money to everyone, including people that don't need the money, we're able to focus that money on the people that need it, but also these people are contributing in ways that our society needs. We need more infrastructure. We need more social workers and people that can, and yes, we need more elder care. We need people to be contributing. The other part of the American dream to me is ownership, right? So part of it is education, part of it is a job, but also is that part to be able to own. UBI doesn't do that at all. Okay, so the long-term solution is because we're taking, I'm going to use Conrad's number of $900 billion, and because it costs so much less to target these jobs at the people who are either unemployed or those situations where we need to hire people, that frees up the rest of that money to create this sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund hasn't been talked about. This is not a communist idea. This is not a socialist idea. This is not seizing the means of production. This is purchasing the means of production. So this money would be able to buy into the ownership of US companies so that as we shift into an automated future, we all can participate in this. Now, it's not going to happen right away, but neither is automation. Okay, so this money will be able to grow and build up and actually allow people to have an ownership stake. So that when we see this huge expansion of wealth that's going to come from automation, we can all share in it. This is not, I want to repeat, this is not necessarily a socialist idea. If you are a socialist, you're a communist, Sam's your guy, right? But for those of you who are like me, I'm as capitalist as they come. My whole thing is, instead of taxing the robots, which I do think is going to cause a lot of problems and a lot of ways to avoid it, let's make the robots work for us. Let's own the robots. Let's make, in the long-term solution to this problem, is to make everyone capitalist, so that we can all participate in, like you said, in the American dream. Last thing I want to point is from a political reality. Switzerland just voted down UBI 80%. So it's not a politically viable solution.
Okay, so just because this shouldn't be a partisan debate, and I don't want it to be like capitalism versus communism, because it's definitely not what it's about. In fact, we're over here trying to remedy inequality. So, we have, our disagreements with the current capitalist system. But I want to say that what makes universal basic income, and Conrad and I both chose to argue this side of the motion, not because, we just wanted to. We both adamantly believe that this is the future and it's the only option we have. So that's what this is about. And what makes UBI super compelling to me is that this is something that can unite left and right. So Richard Nixon was somebody who proposed a modest basic income in the early 70s, but so did Martin Luther King. And MLK said that the easiest way to eradicate poverty is to tackle it head on. And he specifically said that calls for introducing a universal basic income. But what I think is the single most compelling argument is that the very people creating the artificial intelligence that we just talked about, and that really is the crux of this, because when everyone leaves here, technology will continue to evolve, we'll continue about our daily business, but this technology is not only catching up, it is superseding us at all levels. So what I want everyone to keep in mind is that when these jobs disappear, UBI, it's not just our safety net, but it's our way to get ahead. And so welfare, I think, is too often thought of as the safety net that if people are complacent, they get caught in, they lose their work ethic, they get lazy, they mooch, they take handouts, whatever the GOP talking points may be. That's a lot of the premise around something like UBI, but the reality is this isn't a safety net. It's a floor for people to get their footing, to stand up, to reach for the sky, to pursue their individual dreams. And so something else to keep in mind is that there's no one telling you how to spend your share of the UBI. It doesn't have to go to your shelter, your food, or your education. If you want to go study abroad and learn another language, you can do that. If you want to invest in computer programming so you can actually code and really own a share of these robots, whatever your creativity or passions necessitate, those opportunities are available to you. So just keep in mind, first of all, UBI is not replacing your income, it's supplementary. So if you do have a job, hopefully we all still will, but as the trends indicate, we won't. While we have our jobs, this will give us an extra boost to pursue the things that we really want to, so we're not just living paycheck to paycheck. And the reality is, on top of the rich getting richer in this country, as most of us know, wages are stagnating. So the middle class and really the working class are getting a smaller and smaller share of the total money available in this country and in the world. So the last thing I want to say is that the very people creating this AI and these technologies that are taking our jobs, they're the ones calling for universal basic income. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, everyone who's deeply involved in Silicon Valley, they're the ones who know the threats the most. They say more than anyone we need a UBI. So it's not just political people. Thank you.
So I think you came here tonight because you wanted to hear big ideas about what the future can look like. And I hope that I have made good on that promise. The problem are such right now that even this side says, well, capitalism sucks, but what can you do? They portray themselves as the far horizon of what's possible within the system that we live in now, and what would be possible in a system of full automation. And I say that they cast their sights too low, because we're at a point now where capitalism no longer says that it is better than the alternatives. It simply says that it is an inevitable. There's nothing you can do about it. Even in a future where robots do all the work, they want to keep a world where a billionaire can still fundamentally dictate your life, right? I don't think that that is inevitable. I do think a better world is possible. And it's no surprise that they concede that the very people who are advocating this are the people who would have the most to lose in a system that was more just, more fair, more free. It is ultimately a reaction by the owning classes who realize that we're at a crossroads. This can go two ways. On the one hand, you have socialism, and on the other hand, you have barbarism. They have not responded to the arguments that I made that I think are well-founded, that capitalism and the profit motive has led to a degradation of the environmental conditions of our planet and has no prospects for remedying them. I don't think that they have addressed the fact that capitalism and inequality has led to entire nations being invaded and exploited for their natural resources. I don't think that they've addressed the fundamental inequalities that allow, say, millionaires to rampantly sexually abuse people around them, right? These inevitabilities and the militarism that comes with them would be exacerbated under a situation in which the working class was made complacent, in which the working class was saying, well, I'm getting a little bit, and I guess this is really all I can expect. I guess this is really all that I can deserve. Ultimately, it would just be waiting out a period until it is decided that the people who the capitalists, who the owning class, the people who own the robots, would eventually get sick of subsidizing the rest of us. And what they would do next is not the future that we want. The future that we want is one in which people are allowed to decide, not just to be consumers, and not just how they consume, but what they produce, and not just producing with their own hands, but with these incredible machines that we've been able to create. I say, imagine a better world, and a better world is possible.
You guys screwed up my whole prepared speech. You speak my language, and I think the problem is you guys just don't get UBI. I think that's just what it is, you know. And I'd love to sit down with you. All the things you brought up that we didn't have time to address in 30 minutes of this, I've written a paper about literally each one of those things: the power dynamic in sexual relationships, climate change, and helping people that are responding to tragedy. So there is an answer to all those things, but I want to focus more on a couple of things. I'll answer your Switzerland thing. They went from 0 to 25% in one referendum, and they're coming back. That's the biggest growth anything has ever had that I know of. And so I would urge you guys to consider your ideas, which I agree with, and I'm not totally like capitalism, yay. I think the truth is, what we have now is a blend, and it will always have to be a blend. I'm an engineer, and when something is not working, you don't throw it out and do the other. You tweak until it gets further and further, and my future is more like yours. But that's, it takes time to get there. I would urge you guys to consider UBI and really sit with it as the best facilitator of the exact things that you wish. A sovereign wealth fund is just UBI. It is. UBI is the best way to administer a sovereign wealth fund. UBI is public ownership. It's taking, if you fund the UBI with taxes from corporations, with oil profits and things like that, UBI is those things. It's just the best way to do it. It's saying the people should decide how to spend it for themselves rather than waiting for some government program to decide what job to put them in and what money they get after they've proven the right amount of things. So I'm going to skip ahead a little. So Article 25 in the UN's Declaration of Human Rights proclaims that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being of themselves and of their family, which includes food, shelter, clothing, and security in the event of unemployment. We as a nation are not living up to Article 25. Our own Declaration of Independence is founded upon life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But life requires food and shelter, does it not? And if we're not guaranteeing it, we're not guaranteeing those rights. And liberty and the pursuit of happiness requires the ability to say no and walk away from an abusive situation, whether it's a Harvey Weinstein or a shitty employer or your husband. You have to be safe. So anyway, we've always lacked and needed basic income security, and some certain amount of people have always been left behind, forced to lead lives truly not free or recognizably human, and the only way to cover them all is to cover them all. On a societal level, yes, let's talk work programs and tax incentives and all of that. I'm for it. I'm game, but not before UBI. Because only a fool tries to put up the walls before building the floor and the foundation. And on an individual level, security is breath. And we have for too long been allowing our people to be suffocated.
That concludes our debate on basic income. One more round of applause for these fantastic debaters. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I love it. That was awesome. All right, so this time, please fill out your second ballots and hand them to either Thomas or Paul. We're going to come around and collect those, and we're going to tally them up. While that's happening, I just want to get into this exciting project that Conrad is going to be talking to us a little bit about. I'll invite him up here to say just a few words in a minute. But first, I just want to reiterate. Eleanor, do you mind if I just keep? Yep, so first I want to reiterate that if you like what you saw tonight, please spread the word. Sign up for our updates on motiondebate.com. We're taking December off to recalibrate and set up the next few debates of 2018. This is actually going to be our last debate at WeWork Grand Central in this building. Our next debate on Wednesday, January 24th, is going to be at WeWork 300 Park, which is just 5 blocks away from here, across the street from the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. It's also where we host our master classes, which again, the next one is next Thursday, December 7th. So if you guys are interested, there's a 50% off discount code on those handouts. We'd love for you guys to come. It is a steal, and it's going to teach you all about the fundamentals of debate, and so you can be like one of these guys. I promise you it's worth it. So, Conrad, if you don't mind coming up here and just sharing with us a couple words about the project you're working on, and then we'll see an exclusive trailer for it.